Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. It's Sweet 16 time for the Boilermakers, who advanced to the second weekend after a pair of rousing victories in the first two rounds. Now, the time has come as Purdue heads to Detroit and looks to reach the first Final Four since 1980. We're going to preview the Sweet 16 game against Gonzaga here today. We're going to talk about that other game up in Detroit, Tennessee and Creighton. Is there a team Purdue would rather face if it gets past the Zags? We'll talk about all of that. We'll talk a little bit about what's at stake here this week, and then we will answer your questions on the way out. If you don't already, be sure to follow the show on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. Lots to talk about. Come join the conversation, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss a thing. Still trying to figure out what I'm going to do here. If Purdue wins on Friday night, may have something on Saturday morning for you. We'll see, but nonetheless, you're going to want to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Let's do this. Purdue versus Gonzaga, 7:39 Eastern time on Friday night in Detroit, a spot where Purdue has played before in Little Caesars Arena. Back in 2018, Purdue had the first two rounds there, Cal State Fullerton and Butler. Big Dakota Mathias 3 to lift Purdue over Butler. Of course, the Isaac Haas injury took place there as well in the Cal State Fullerton game. So Purdue's been there. None of these players have been there. PJ Thompson's been there. Matt Painter's been there. There you go. It's not a completely unfamiliar environment, but it kind of is at the same time. Look, it's an interesting matchup here. It's really interesting because Purdue and Gonzaga have met once before this season. And Purdue struggled early on in that game before really, putting it into supercharge in the second half and running away with that game a little bit. Purdue won that game by 10. And for the bulk of the second half, that's really, that felt pretty good. That game felt like it was in Purdue's hands pretty easily. Gonzaga's certainly gotten better since then. Gonzaga's added some transfers, Nemhart, Graham Ike, a couple of really big pieces that transferred into the program. So, that much is certainly something that they've had to deal with. And it's something that has taken some time for Gonzaga to settle into. Over time, Gonzaga has, and it's gone really well for Gonzaga. But again, it's hard with Gonzaga sometimes because Gonzaga plays as tough of a non-conference as anyone. There's the notion that Gonzaga doesn't play a real tough schedule, and that's not always true. Gonzaga plays a pretty tough non-conference schedule. You look at it this year, and Gonzaga goes to the Maui Invitational. It takes on Southern Cal. It takes on Washington. It takes on UConn, San Diego State. Those are all pretty tough games. The West Coast Conference makes things difficult. It's not exactly it's not going through the 1927 Yankees every night, but that's reality. So it is a little bit tough. Gonzaga's won 16 of its last 18 or something like that. So Gonzaga's playing well. What the reality is there, I don't know. Is that a reflection of the West Coast Conference? Is that a reflection of a much improved Gonzaga team? I'm not sure. It's the same Gonzaga blueprint that we're used to. It's a very good offense. It's a fine defense. If you look at the KenPom numbers, 7th in offensive efficiency, 41st in defensive efficiency. So solid on defense, but Gonzaga shoots very well. 7th in effective field goal percentage. Gonzaga doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot. That's a very encouraging thing if you're a Zags fan. It shoots well from 3, 36%, 58% inside the arc. Gonzaga's a really good offensive team. It doesn't force many turnovers, but teams don't shoot all that well against it, especially from outside. Gonzaga can be vulnerable inside the arc, No, Gonzaga is very good at defending inside the arc. What am I looking at here? Gonzaga is excellent defending inside the arc, but it likes to play one-on-one in the post. Is that a winning formula against Purdue? Well, I don't know. I doubt it. But, it's not like anyone has really cracked the code of completely stopping Zach Edey. Even when teams double him, even when teams swarm him, he tends to have 20 and 10 nonetheless. So this is a rematch of both this year's Maui Invitational, last year's PK 85. There's some familiarity here. I don't know whether that's a good thing for Purdue or not. Gonzaga has seen Zach Edey before, and that does change things a little bit. He's a pretty unique player that Gonzaga's at least seen. Does that help them? I don't know, because there are teams like Michigan State who have seen Zach Edey plenty of times, and it has not made a difference. We'll see what Gonzaga does. It's a pretty veteran group. You've got guys who have played a lot of basketball on that roster. I don't think the moment's going to phase Gonzaga, but at the same time, you do have to question whether Gonzaga can win this game or not, because as you sit here and look at Gonzaga's best wins of the season, it beat Kentucky in Rupp Arena. That's a really good win. I know things didn't end well for Kentucky, but that's still a good win. And past that, it beat St. Mary's on the road. That's a good win. And it beat Kansas without Lance McCuller, or Kevin McCullough. Goodness. Lance McCullers a baseball player. I'm all over the place tonight. But that's reality. Gonzaga is not exactly the same Gonzaga team that, was a 1 seed with Jalen Suggs, was a 1 seed with Chet Holmgren. This isn't the same Gonzaga team. It's still a very good one, but, it doesn't have Drew Timme anymore. It doesn't have that just star player. It has very good players. Graham Ike is tough. Ryan Nemhart, Nolan Hickman, Anton Watson. These are good players. Braden Huff's a good young player, but it doesn't have that super high-end player. It's going to be interesting to see this game. I think if you're a Purdue fan, you've got to feel decent. I know you can never be 100% comfortable going into a Sweet 16 game. After all, when you look at this year's tournament, it's kind of chalky here. A lot of good teams are in the Sweet 16, and especially in this region, if Purdue gets to a Final Four, it will have had to beat 2 very good teams to get there. It will have had to beat Gonzaga, and it will have had to have beat either Tennessee or Creighton. I look at this matchup between Tennessee and Creighton, and we're just playing the hypothetical game here. If Purdue gets past Gonzaga, which team would it rather play? Would you rather have the Vols, or would you rather have Creighton? And I'm not sure. You can talk me into either answer there. You really can. With Tennessee, you know what you're getting. You've seen Tennessee before. You played it out in Maui in a game that won't be soon forgotten for the way that game was played. 51 total fouls, a real slugfest. Purdue kind of holds on to win it late. Really ugly. Really, really ugly. Purdue shoots horribly from the free throw line. 48 free throw attempts for Purdue. Purdue doesn't shoot well from 3 or from the field, really. Crazy game, really. Purdue turns it over 16 times and still wins. That doesn't happen much. You know what you're getting. It's a really good defensive team at Tennessee. Dalton Knecht is one of the best players in the country, but, you also saw Tennessee come fairly close to losing to Texas in the last game. A Texas team that, frankly, I don't think is wonderful, but at times Tennessee can struggle to score the ball. We'll see what happens against Creighton, because Creighton's kind of the opposite. The defense is solid for Creighton. It is. When you look at the numbers, frankly, it's a lot like Purdue. It's very similar to Purdue, where the metrics tell you it's a solid defense. It does not shoot many, it does not allow its opponents to shoot many free throws. It does not force a ton of turnovers. It for the most part, really makes you attack that mid-range, because it does kind of what Purdue does with Ryan Kalkbrenner and Zach Edey, where you drop that big guy and funnel things into him to clean up at the rim. It's a fairly different approach. In fact, number 1 in the country in fewest free throws allowed per field goal attempt is Creighton. So it's kind of similar there. It's a little interesting. And if Tennessee moves on, it will have faced a similar defense in Creighton. Not the same, but a similar defense. Creighton's kind of, when it's hot, it's really hard to beat. Creighton shoots a ton of threes. About half its field goal attempts come from three-point range. It makes a ton of them. It's good in two-point range. I mean, effective field goal percentage is fantastic. It shoots really well. It takes care of the basketball pretty well. It does not really go after offensive rebounds a ton. If Kalkbrenner can't get it, they're getting back. It's a small team outside of Kalkbrenner. It's very reliant on its starters. So if you're playing a second game of the weekend, I don't think fatigue's much of an issue, but it's worth noting that there's not a ton of depth there. That's what you've got, though. I don't know which team Purdue would rather play. You can tell me either way, and I wouldn't really push back too hard at you, because if Creighton gets hot, you're dealing with a real uphill battle to get to that Final Four. But if you play Tennessee, it's going to be close. It's going to come down to the wire. It's probably going to be ugly. I don't know which way you go in with more comfort. I really don't. But, again, this is what this whole season has come down to. And you guys know my opinions on this. Purdue's been playing basketball since November. It's 31-4 on the season. By any possible way of measuring things, this has been an excellent season for Purdue. But in the court of public opinion, and in the eyes of many Purdue fans, this weekend will determine whether this season is a success or a failure. And there's really not a ton of in between, especially with that national media narrative. John Rothstein has said it ever since Zach Edey announced he was coming back. This year is Final Four or bust for Purdue. If you believe in that line of thinking, okay. If you don't, okay. I'm not here to tell you how to feel about things. I don't personally love it, but I get it. It's college basketball in 2024. The NCAA tournament is where judgments are made and where national opinions form, and it's where the eyeballs are on this sport. If Purdue does this and goes to the Final Four, you're looking at a real vindication here. You're looking at a team that did what I guess would be the second time that a team has lost to a 16 seed, and then the second time it got to a Final Four thereafter. With Virginia, of course, they won the national title, but this would be a real validation if you're Purdue. If Purdue doesn't get there, then a lot of the same takes are going to continue. That Purdue can't do it, that Purdue will never do it. Does it make sense? Not really, but that's how things go. That's just part of it. So get ready, because that's going to come if Purdue doesn't advance out of this. I think when you look at the Sweet 16, Elite 8, when you look at the bracket as a whole right now, this is a really tough field. Some years, the Sweet 16 is pretty light. You have a lot of upsets. You have a lot of double-digit seeds or, top seeds going down. But you have all 8 of the top seeds. The 1s and 2s are all there. You've got just one double-digit seed, and, it's still a Power 5 school. Clemson's in there as a 6, and then it's heavyweights besides that. It's a pretty good Sweet 16 here. I think it's going to be a really good weekend of basketball. You look at Illinois, Iowa State. I'm fascinated to see that game. UConn, can they get back to the Final Four? That'd be pretty impressive. I think it's going to happen, but it'd be very impressive. Alabama, North Carolina should be wild. Duke, Houston, Creighton, Tennessee. I mean, this is going to be a really, really good weekend of basketball. This is, in a perfect world, kind of what you get, where you get a few good upsets in the first round, like Oakland, like, NC State, kinda, Grand Canyon, but by the end of the first weekend, you're still looking at a lot of the best teams still in the field. That's what you want. We'll see how this week plays out. It should be a lot of fun. I'm fascinated to see what Detroit looks like. I would fully anticipate there being a pretty strong Purdue contingent there. Tennessee will certainly travel well. I don't really know much about Creighton as a traveling fan base, but that's what it's going to be. This is kind of what everything's come down to. With Purdue, I think, and this will be my last thought here before hitting the Q&A and getting out of here, but I think if you're Purdue, you look at how locked in the team has been, and if you're a Purdue fan, I should say, this team is pretty locked in. It's been floated around that, Purdue didn't exactly celebrate beating Utah State. It wasn't some celebration with super soakers like Illinois had, or, the team wasn't dancing around in the locker room like you see some other schools doing. And that's fine. There is no right or wrong way to do things. There really isn't. But Purdue has taken this very businesslike. Purdue has taken this with a lot of seriousness. Purdue has really made this the mission. And there's no doubt Purdue feels the pressure. There's no doubt at all that Purdue feels that. You can't possibly think they don't. But as Purdue gets into this, we'll see what happens here. This has the potential to be really big time for Purdue. Purdue kind of gets its Maui Invitational rematch against Gonzaga, could get the same against Tennessee. And, ultimately, look, no path to the Final Four is easy, but I don't think this is the worst path in the world. It's going to be difficult, but it's never going to be easy. That's just where it is. Purdue can get by Gonzaga, and then you've got 40 minutes against either Tennessee or Creighton. So let's get into the Q&A here. I wanted to start. Who is the biggest X factor for Purdue to get through Detroit and go to Phoenix? I think I would say Braden Smith. If you get an elite level Braden Smith, the Braden Smith that has really just wheeled and dealed at times this year and controlled that offense as well as any point guard in America controls their offense, I think you feel phenomenal about Purdue's chances of getting to Phoenix. I think Mason Gillis plays a big role here. Something did not seem quite right to me in his performance, especially against Grambling. I think maybe he started to click later on against Utah State. He'll loom large. And I think you just look at that backcourt tandem of Lance Jones and Fletcher Lawyer. You don't have to get 15, 20 points from each of them, but you need one of them to be playing well on every night for you to play your best as a team. So Braden Smith is my answer there, but there are a few others that certainly play a role. What has Gonzaga changed since the Maui Invitational? The listener says they look substantially better. They've played a lot of West Coast Conference games since then. It's like I kind of talked about. You don't know what's real sometimes because Gonzaga does play a lot of conference games against teams that aren't particularly good. I'm looking here at their KenPom. I mean, you play 2 games against Pacific, who is the 7th worst team in the country, 5th worst team in the country on KenPom. I mean, that's not exactly great. You play Portland, who's 298. You play Pepperdine and San Diego in the 200s. Loyola Marymount, 183. I mean, this is a severe lack of really high-end competition. But at the same time, Gonzaga's absolutely gotten better. You just look at some of the scoring output, it's gone up. Gonzaga scoring 63 against Purdue. Gonzaga scores 69 against UCLA. Gonzaga is really scoring the ball well. They've got a lot of veteran players. You look at this. I mean, Nolan Hickman, Anton Watson, Nemhart, Graham Ike, Braden Huff settling in a little bit. Ben Gregg is a junior who's played some ball. So it's an experienced team. And as that comes together, it gets better over time. I think learning to play without Drew Timme probably took a little bit of time. But I don't think Gonzaga has changed a ton. I don't know that there's some massive difference. Does Purdue look at the past two matchups with Gonzaga for a blueprint, or the most recent games, are they a better answer? I think a little bit of both. Certainly you look at what Gonzaga's done recently, and you look at Gonzaga being a little bit of a different team, and that's important. I think especially when formulating a defensive game plan, I think that's what matters the most, is what Gonzaga's been having success with lately. On the offensive end, I think a little bit of what you've seen from Gonzaga is probably what you're going to get. I don't know that Gonzaga is going to change things up tremendously. Now, Purdue has seen a lot of what there is to see defensively. There are very few things you're going to throw at Purdue that it hasn't seen this year, last year, because with what Purdue has with Zach Edey, teams have really tried to throw a ton at him, and it hasn't really worked. So I think it's a bit of a blend. I think Purdue will certainly know what worked against Gonzaga the last two matchups, but at the same time, Purdue's not going to be blind to what's worked from Gonzaga well lately, what Gonzaga is wanting to do. So I think it's a good mix. Not necessarily a question, but listener says that Fletcher Lawyer and Trey Kaufman-Renn have been stronger the last few games, spent less time on the ground trying to get foul calls, and just enforcing their will. Yeah, I've certainly heard this with Fletcher Lawyer especially, that he ends up on the ground a lot, and it's probably true. He does certainly take some contact, but I think with Trey Kaufman-Renn, the guy's been phenomenal. As we talked about Sunday night, he's been terrific for Purdue. I think at times, he's had the opportunity to make some plays in space. You look at his two different times where he hits a spin move on the baseline and goes in for a score, or he has some room to operate. That's what he doesn't really get a ton of with Zach Edey on the floor. Now, he's had some more time without Zach Edey because Caleb First isn't really playing. He's playing with Kaufman-Renn's playing with Mason Gillis more. They're doing more double post stuff. The passing has been better from post to post. It's been interesting. Both those guys, though, had a really good weekend for Purdue last weekend. Fletcher Lawyer hit some big-time shots against Grambling when Purdue really needed it. He only finished the game with 8 points and, just 3 for 4 from the field. But all 8 of those points were at the end of the first half when Purdue went on a good run going into the half and never looked back. And then against Utah State, again, 15 points for him. 15 points for him. Really efficient. 5 for 9 from the field, makes all 4 free throws, has 6 assists, no turnovers. Really good stuff. He's playing good basketball. As a whole, Purdue's playing some really good basketball right now. And I think that has to just be really encouraging. It doesn't guarantee anything. What Purdue has done in the first 2 rounds has been wonderful. It doesn't guarantee anything when that ball gets tipped on Friday night. But it does make you feel pretty good about where Purdue's at, because momentum is all you can ask for. And both these teams have it. Both these teams have a lot of it. On the other side, Tennessee and Creighton are in a little different spot where they didn't blow out their round of 32 opponent. They both had some close games go down to the wire. We'll see what happens up in Detroit. And to close it out, Brian Yosemite, what's your favorite Detroit establishment? I haven't exactly spent a ton of time in the city of Detroit. I've spent some time in the suburbs, but I can't really give you a great answer there. You can get yourself some Little Caesars pizza. I know Jets Pizza is kind of a chain too. Jets is some good Detroit-style pizza. I'm no Detroit expert, but I'm sure there's some good stuff up there. And I know Brian is up there, and he can give you some good answers. So that's all I've got for today. Thank you all for spending time with me. I appreciate you all. We'll be back. If Purdue wins, I will plan on doing something Saturday morning. If Purdue does not, then I'll come back to you maybe Sunday, maybe Monday to put a wrap on the season a little bit. We'll see what happens. We will see where things go, but be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything along the way. Follow along on Twitter for all of the thoughts from the weekend. And until next time, guys, enjoy the games.